Growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, I was exposed to a lot of video games on the consoles. One of the earliest games I remember playing and having an absolute blast with was Sonic the Hedgehog. As a kid, I thought Sonic was cool, and to be honest, I think I preferred the blue blur over the kid-friendly Super Mario.
That is blasphemous!
Sega would become one of my all-time favorite logos to see when I played any game over at my uncle's house, but the game I remember playing the most was Sonic the Hedgehog. I bet I know what you're thinking though. Why am I bringing up Sonic the Hedgehog and Sega on an MMORPG channel? Well, if you've watched my Phantasy Star Online 2 video, you would know that Sega isn't necessarily foreign to the MMORPG genre, basically being one of the pioneers in online co-op games with their first Phantasy Star Online title back on the Dreamcast. But see, Phantasy Star Online wasn't my first experience with Sega's online properties. No, that would be a game that dropped way back in 2011. Developed by 3 Rings, who was acquired by Sega, making them the publisher, Spiral Knights would be my first dive into an MMORPG under Sega's family. Spiral Knights was right up my alley with the aesthetics, gameplay, and overall tone. It had charm and life to it that not many online games I knew of at the time replicated. I played it for a couple months on Steam back in 2011, but quickly jumped ship like I normally would back then, chasing the next online game that caught my eye. Fast forward to 2020, and lo and behold, I decided to take another stab at the game. Ironically, I would come to find that the studio was disbanded by Sega in 2016, with some of the major developers forming Grey Havens to save their games from shutting down, essentially no longer making it have any ties to Sega, which honestly doesn't matter in the long run. But a good question to ask Grey Haven Studios would be, was Spiral Knights worth saving? Personally, I believe the game has carved a small spot in the MMORPG landscape, but competition is tough nowadays, with so many games to choose from and with plenty on the horizon. Ultimately, I think most of you are here to find out one thing. Is it worth checking out? Is it worth playing for a long period of time or spending some money on? Well, let's find out. Let's discuss Spiral Knights. Spiral Knights is described as a top-down, third-person, real-time action-adventure game. Arguably, the game is not really considered an MMORPG, but an MMOG, massively multiplayer online game, with light RPG elements such as character progression and class archetypes to an extent. The story of Spiral Knights is that you, a Knight of the Spiral Order, have crash-landed on a strange planet called Cradle. Cradle holds a precious energy resource that could save the Knights by powering their main ship called the Skylark, to ultimately leave Cradle. However, the energy within the core of the planet is deep within the planet's dungeon called Clockworks. You, as the Knight, have been tasked with delving into the dungeon with your fellow Order to try and save your people. From the beginning, you are thrown into the game's story, which serves as a tutorial of everything the game has to offer, as well as some of the game's main source of content to play. Each story quest or mission will have you either learning about a game mechanic, such as how enemies behave, or will have you exploring the game's randomly generated dungeon mentioned before, called Clockworks. Other content will include daily quests called the Prestige Quests that reward you with prestige, more on that system later. The expansion tab with the listed Operation Crimson Hammer is a pseudo-raid of sorts that has a longer dungeon type that can be played for some nice rewards, but that content requires the purchase of the DLC, costing $6. Finally, Arcade is similar to Operation Crimson Hammer. The dungeons in Arcade mode are longer type dungeons that get harder and harder the further you explore them, but it's ultimately free compared to Operation Crimson Hammer. There is also PvP modes within the Colosseum that are largely unplayed, unfortunately. The modes would be Lockdown, which plays like Capture the Point, and Blast Network, which plays like Bomberman, which is actually pretty cool, but as mentioned, PvP isn't really played too much, which is a shame considering the two modes have a lot of potential to be really fun. Combat in Spiral Knights has a lot of cool mechanics to it, which makes all these content types pretty addicting. The easiest way I can describe combat in its basic form within the game would be to think about The Legend of Zelda. Generally, combat boils down to a few actions, which would be slashing your sword, firing your gun, using a bomb, or using your shield to defend or dodge out of the way. Each weapon also has a charge attack similar to Link's spin attack in Zelda. Depending on the weapon you choose, your charge attack is different, which makes weapons have a bit of diversity. Finally, there is armor, which consists of your helmet, body, and shield. Depending on what type of character you want to play will determine what type of weapons and armor you will want to use and level up. Certain armor helps gun speed, certain ones help make you tankier and give more health. Some will allow you to resist certain damage types like fire, ice, dark, piercing, poison resistance. Some will allow you to fight specific enemy types easier, like slimes or animals or undead. The equipment system is pretty deep and reminds me of something like Monster Hunter with their armor types. Spiral Knights encourages you to swap out equipment you have that will better suit the type of content you are delving into. For instance, if you were exploring a dungeon that primarily has undead enemies within it, you may want to swap to an equipment set that is more powerful against that enemy type. In addition to everything I mentioned, there is also trinkets and then battle sprites, which serve as pets that help you in battle. Trinkets are small pieces of equipment that will provide you some extra protection, but cannot be equipped unless you spend some energy, which is the premium currency, which I'll cover in the cash shop section. Battle sprites are little pets that you can take into battle with you that will have various effects. Generally, there are 3 types of pets to choose from, with your first one being free, while the others need to be earned or once again purchased with premium currency. Going back to the equipment system, there is also crafting, which goes hand in hand. Everything you equip has to be either purchased or crafted using materials you find within the dungeons. Recipes for each piece of equipment also has to be learned first before you can actually craft that item you want. But the recipes are usually pretty easy to come by, at least in the early game. Next, let's talk about actual progression within Spiral Knights. Progression in Spiral Knights works in a slightly horizontal level. There is no specific level your character has. Instead, power is based on your equipment. Equipment has various ranks based on how powerful they are, ranging from 0-star equipment all the way up to 5-star equipment. Each piece of equipment can also be upgraded to level 10, where it is then considered maxed. From there, it doesn't stop though. Each piece of equipment can also gain random perks, called unique variants, that further boost specific stats like damage or defense when it is then upgraded from, say, a 2-star to a 3-star. This can help build essentially your perfect weapon if you get the correct perks, but since they are randomized, it can be pretty difficult to get your selected weapon to have the specific perks you want. Leveling up each weapon and armor is the simple part though. Simply explore dungeons, defeat enemies, and gain the orange orbs called heat, which then applies experience to your items. Once the item has been fully heated, it can then be upgraded with the cost of fire crystals, a resource that is randomly found in dungeons or bought on the cash shop. Prestige is also another form of progression, kind of. Prestige is essentially a value added to your character that shows how much you've more or less played the game. Each mission rewards prestige, which adds to your total value, which in summary is a number that you can flex to other players that shows more or less how long you've played the game. Well, I guess now that I've talked about almost everything the game has to offer, or how most things work to an extent, the last thing would be the cash shop. The cash shop in Spiral Knights works similar to games like Warframe, where most of it is either cosmetic or time savers. Things like being able to buy a weapon rather than craft it, increasing experience gained, or buying resources like fire crystals are things the cash shop largely offers. Weapon slots and trinket slots are maybe the worst offenders here, being that to hold more than 2 weapons or even being able to equip trinkets, you have to pay premium currency to have that ability. But to be fair, it's very cheap, basically as little as a couple dollars, which could then be seen as a monthly subscription since they last 30 days. Loot boxes are here as well, but are largely cosmetic in nature. Things like equipment customization are largely earned within the loot boxes, but everything is tradable, so if you don't want to spend real money on those items, you can just trade for them them, which leads to my next point. Currency in Spiral Knights has a two-way street, which means premium currency can actually be traded for game currency, meaning that if you play enough, you can actually earn a decent amount of premium currency to buy certain things in the cash shop you want. The trade value of premium currency right now is about 7,000 crowns for 100 energy. It usually takes maybe an hour or so to farm that much currency from dungeons depending on your current equipment, so in theory, earning a decent amount of premium currency is very possible. The cash shop also houses something called the Shadow Keys. Shadow Keys are used to challenge the Shadow Lairs, which are some of the endgame dungeons within Spiral Knights. The last couple things I want to touch on are performance and the game's art style. Art style in Spiral Knights takes a more chibi cutesy approach, with its graphics being more stylized to have a more timeless feel. While it still definitely looks like a near decade old game, it's still better than some of the older games out there. Music is also just, in my opinion, really catchy to listen to while you play. For instance, the battle music is really good in my opinion. Lastly, performance. While the game doesn't necessarily have any issues running on just about any computer nowadays, lag is a common thing you will have to experience and has seemed to be an issue for years. Fully expect your character to rubber band all over the place when playing, and while there are some technical fixes out there posted by the community, it's still a bit shocking to see that players have had to come up with ways to fix server lag, which should ultimately be the developer's job to try and fix. Anyways, let's discuss my overall thoughts on Spiral Knights. Spiral Knights has a simple gameplay loop within its combat system. The hack and slash gameplay provides an easy drop in and drop out experience, giving the ability to either be played casually or more hardcore. The game has a great look and feel to it, especially with its music. The retro style music won't be for everyone, but for those who do, will definitely enjoy Spiral Knights' look and sound. The game has a pretty friendly, albeit small, community, with most players being in a guild that will gladly allow you to join them. The game's equipment slash crafting system has some nice depth to it and is fairly easy to understand versus a more complex system seen in other MMOs currently. Lastly, the game has a great rewarding structure in which everything is earnable as long as you play, all the way down to even premium currency, giving an argument that the game is fully free to play, with even that DLC pack being earnable if you play enough. Spiral Knights has a pretty small community nowadays, meaning that if you're trying to do some random queues, odds are you won't find anyone to play with unless you join a guild or get lucky. The game has a very sporadic developer team that seems to drop content very rarely. The game is arguably almost in maintenance mode, but some content has dropped over the years. Unfortunately, it just hasn't been much. PvP, as stated before, isn't really played too much unless you are part of a guild, so if you are looking for an MMO with a healthy PvP community, Spiral Knights isn't that game. The cash shop can also be seen as somewhat advantageous for those who are willing to spend money. However, to be fair, you can earn everything within the game if you are willing to play enough. Lastly, the game has a pretty terrible issue with server lag. Not everyone will experience this since everyone has different levels of internet speed, but it is something worth noting. And that is my thoughts on Spiral Knights. Thanks for watching, everyone. The game actually surprised me with how fun it can be, so I plan on playing it casually. After watching the video, do you plan on playing Spiral Knights? Or are you already playing Spiral Knights? Let me know down below in the comment section. I reply to everyone, so let's start a discussion. If you want to help support the channel, consider leaving the video a like, as well as subscribing to the channel for more content. I also have my social media sites like Discord and Twitter in the description below, so if you want to follow those sites, follow those links. Lastly, I gotta give major props to my loyal supporters. Thanks everyone. Anyways, that is all for this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.